So, welcome on in, everyone, as we are continuing with um, Phantastes, Faerie Romance by George MacDonald. We are picking up with Chapter 12. Chained is the spring, the night wind bold blows over the hard earth. Time is not more confused and cold, nor keeps more wintry mirth. Yet blow and roll the world about, blow, time, blow winter's wind. Through chinks of time heaven peepeth out, and spring the frost behind. G.E.M. They who believe in the influences of the stars over the fates of men are, in feeling at least, nearer the truth than they who regard the heavenly bodies as related to them merely by a common obedience to an external law. All that man sees has to do with man. Worlds cannot be without an intermundane relationship. The community of the center of all creation suggests an interradiating connection and dependence of the parts. Else a grander idea is conceivable than that which is already embodied. The blank, which is only forgotten life, lying behind the consciousness, and the misty splendor which is an undeveloped life laying before. It may be full of mysterious revelations of other connections with the worlds around us than those of science and poetry. No shining belt or gleaming moon, no red and green glory in a self-encircling twin star, but has a relation with the hidden things of a man's soul, and it may be with the secret history of his body as well. They are portions of the living house wherein he abides. Through the realms of the monarch sun creeps a world whose course had begun, on a weary path with a weary pace before the earth sprang forth on her race. But many a time the earth had sped around the path she still must tread, ere the elder planet on leaden wing once circled the court of the planet's king. There in that lonely and distant star the seasons are not as our seasons are, but many a year hath autumn to dress the trees in their matron loveliness. As long hath old winter in triumph to go o'er beauties dead in his vaults below. And many a year the spring doth wear, combing the icicles from her hair, and winter dear summer hath years of June, with large white clouds and cool showers at noon, and a beauty that grows to await like grief, till a burst of tears is the heart's relief. Children born when winter is king may never rejoice in the hoping spring, though their own hearts bud are bursting with joy. All the children hath grown to the girl or boy, but may die with cold and icy hours, watching them ever in the place of flowers. And some who wake from their primal sleep, when the sighs of summer through forest creep, live and love and are loved again, seek for pleasure and find its pain, sink to their last, their forsaken sleeping, with the same sweet odors around them creeping. Now the children there are not born as the children are born in worlds nearer to the sun, but they arrive no one knows how. A maiden walking alone hears a cry, for even there a cry is the first utterance, and searching about she findeth under an overhanging rock, or within a clump of bushes, or it may be betwixt grey stones in the side of a hill, or in any other sheltered and unexpected spot, a little child. This she taketh tenderly, and beareth home with joy, calling out, "Mother, mother!" If so be that her mother lives. "Got a baby, I have found a child." All the household gathers round to see. "Where is it? What is it like? Where did you find it?" And such questions abounding, and thereupon she relates the whole story of the discovery. For by the circumstances such as season of the year, time of the day, condition of the air, and such like, and especially the peculiar and never repeated aspect of the heavens and earth at the time, and the nature of the place of shelter where it is found is determined, or at least indicated the nature of the child thus discovered. Therefore, at certain seasons and in certain states of the weather, according in parts to their own fancy, the young women go out to look for children. They generally avoid seeking them, though they cannot help sometimes finding them in places and with circumstances uncongenial to their peculiar likings. But no sooner is a child found than its claim for protection and nurture obliterates all feeling of choice in the matter. Chiefly, however, in the season of summer, which lasts so long, coming as it does after such long intervals, and mostly in the warm evenings around the middle of twilight, and principally in the woods and along the river banks, do the maidens go looking for children, just as children look for flowers. And ever as the child grows, yea, more and more as he advances in years, will his face indicate to those who understand the spirit of nature and her utterances in the face of the world the nature of the place of his birth, and the other circumstances thereof. Whether a clear morning sun guided his mother to the nook where issued the boy's low cry, or at eve the lonely maiden. For the same woman never finds a second, at least while the first lives, discovers the girl by the glimmer of her white skin, lying in a nest like that of the lark amid long encircling grasses, and upward gazing eyes of the lovely daisies, wherein the storm bowed the forest trees around, or the still frost fixed in the silence the else flowing and babbling streams. After they grow up, the men and women are but little together. There is this peculiar difference between them, which likewise distinguishes the women from those of the earth. The men alone have arms, the women have only wings. Resplendent wings are they, wherein they can shroud themselves from head to foot in a panoply of glistering glory. By these wings alone it may frequently be judged in what seasons and under what aspects they were born. From those that came in the winter go great white wings, white as snow, the edge of every feather shining like the sheen of silver, so that they flash and glitter like frost in the sun. But underneath they are tinged with a faint pink or rose color. Those born in spring have wings of a brilliant green, green as grass, and towards the edges of the feathers are enameled like the surface of the grass blades. These again are white within. Those that are born in summer have wings of a deep rose color, lined with pale gold, and those born in autumn have purple wings, with a rich brown on the inside. But these colors are modified and altered in all varieties, corresponding to the mood of the day and hour as well as the season of the year, and sometimes I have found the various colors so intermingled that I could not determine even the season, though doubtless hieroglyphic could be deciphered by more experienced eyes. One splendor in particular I remember, wings of deep carmine, with an inner down of warm gray, around a form of brilliant whiteness. She had been found as the sun went down through a low sea fog, casting crimson along a broad sea path into a little cave on the shore, where a bathing maiden saw her lying. But though I speak of sun and fog and sea and shore, the world there is in with some respects very different from the earth wherein men live. For instance, the water reflects no forms. To the unaccustomed eye they appear, if undisturbed, like the surface of a dark metal. Only that latter would reflect indistinctly, whereas they reflect not at all except light which falls immediately upon them. There is a great effect in causing the landscapes to differ from those on earth. On the stillest evening no tall ship on the sea sends a long wavering reflection almost to the feet of him on the shore. The face of no maiden brightens at its own beauty and of still force well. The sun and moon alone make a glimmer on the surface. The sea is like a sea of death, ready to engulf and never to reveal, a visible shadow of oblivion. Yet the women sport in its waters like gorgeous sea-birds. The men more rarely enter them. But on the contrary, the sky reflects everything beneath it, as if it were built of water like ours. Of course, for its concavity, there is some distortion of the reflected objects, yet wondrous combinations of form are often to be seen in the overchanging depth. And then it is not shaped so much like a round dome as the sky of the earth, but more of an egg shape, rises to a great towering height in the middle, appearing far more lofty than the other. When the stars come out at night, it shows a mighty cupola, fretted with golden fires, wherein there is room for all tempests to rush and rave. One evening in early summer, I stood with a group of men and women on a steep rock that overhung the sea. They were all questioning me about my world and the ways thereof, and making reply to one of their questions. I was compelled to say that children are not born in earth as with them. Upon this I was assailed with a whole battery of inquiries, which at first I tried to avoid, but at last I was compelled, in the vaguest manner I could invent, to make some approach to the subject in question. Immediately a dim notion of what I meant seemed to dawn in the midst of most of the women. Some of them folded their great wings all around them, as they generally do when in the least offended, and stood erect and motionless. One spread out her rosy pinions and flashed from the promontory into the gulf at its foot. A great light shone in the eyes of one maiden, who turned and walked slowly away, with her purple and white wings half dispread behind her. She was found the next morning dead beneath a withered tree on a bare hillside some miles inland. They buried her where she lay, as is their custom, for before they die they instinctively search for a spot like the place of their birth, and having found one that satisfies them, they lie down, fold their wings around them, if they be women, or cross their arms over their breasts if they are men, just as if they were going to sleep, and so sleep indeed. The sign or cause of coming death is an indescribable longing for something, they know not what, which seizes them and drives them into solitude, consuming them within, till the body fails. When a youth and a maiden look too deep into each other's eyes, this longing seizes and possesses them. But instead of drawing near to the other, they wander away, each alone, into solitary places and die of their desire. But it seems to me that thereafter they are born babes upon our earth, where if when grown they find each other, it goes well with them. If not, it will seem to go ill. But of this I know nothing. When I told them that the women on earth had not wings like them but arms, they stared, and said how boldly and masculine they must look, not knowing that their wings, glorious as they are but undeveloped arms. But see the power of this book, that while recounting when I recall of its contents, I write as if myself had visited the far-off planet, learned its ways and appearances, and conversed with its men and women, and so while writing it seemed to me that I had. The book goes on with the story of a maiden, who born at the close of autumn, and living in a long to her endless winter, set out at last to find the regions of spring, for as in our earth the seasons are divided over the globe. It begins something like this. She watched them dying for many a day, dropping from off the old trees away, one by one or else in a shower, crowding over the withered flower, for as if they had done some grievous wrong, the sun had nursed them and loved them so long. Grew weary of loving and turning back, hastened away on its southern track, and helplessly hung each shriveled leaf, faded away with an idle grief, and the gusts of wind sad autumn sighs mournfully swept through their families, casting away with a helpless moan all that he might yet call his own. As the child, when his bird is gone forever, findeth, is gone forever, flingeth the cage on the wandering river, and the giant trees, as bare as death, slowly bowed to the great wind's breath, and groaned with trying to keep from groaning, amidst the young trees bending and moaning, and the ancient planet's mighty sea was heaving and falling most restlessly, and the tops of the waves were broken and white, tossing about to ease their might. And the river was striving to reach the main, and the ripple was hurrying back again. Nature lived in sadness now. Sadness lived on the maiden's brow, as she watched with a fixed half-conscious eye one lonely leaf that trembled on high, till it dropped at least from the desolate bough. Sorrow, oh sorrow, 'tis winter now. And our tears gushed forth, though it was but a leaf, for little will lose the swollen fountain of grief. When up to the lip the water goes, it needs but a drop and it overflows. Oh, many and many a dreary year must pass away ere the buds appear. Many a night of darksome sorrow yields to the light of a joyless morrow, ere birds again on the closed trees shall find the branches with melodies. She will dream of meadows with wakeful streams, of wavy grass and the sunny beams, of hidden wells that soundless spring, hoarding their joys a golden thing, of founts that tell it all day long, to the listening woods with their exultant song. She will dream of evenings that die into nights, where each sense is filled with its own delights, and the soul is still as the vaulted sky, lulled within inner harmony, and the flowers give out the dewy night, change into perfume the gathered light, and the darkness sings upon all their host, till the sun sail up on the eastern coast. She still wake and see the branches bare, weaving a net in the frozen air. The story goes on to tell how at last, weary with winteriness, she traveled towards the southern regions of our globe to meet the spring on its slow way down northwards, and how after many sad adventures, many disappointing hopes, and many tears, bitter and fruitless, she found at last, one stormy afternoon, in a leafless forest, a single snowdrop growing betwixt the borders of the winter and spring. She lay down beside it and died. I almost believe that a child, pale and peaceful as a snowdrop, was born in the earth within a fixed season from that stormy afternoon. There's the end of chapter 12. Jeez, that's Steve Michael. There. Also, okay, I think Family Dog wants something. Hold on. Just a second. Uno momento, por favor. You don't want out? Looking at the door. Okay. Let me reseatify myself. Reseatify. Okay. Oh. Hold on. Okay, you did it. Just wanted to look at the door. Okay. Okay, there you go. You can look at the door like you want out. Have fun with that dog. Okay. Chapter 13. I saw a ship sailing upon the sea, deeply laden as ship could be, but not so deep as in love I am, for I care not whether I sink or swim. Old ballad. But love is such a mystery I cannot find it out, for when I think I'm the best resolved, I then am in most doubt. Sir John Suckling. One story I will try to reproduce, but alas, it is like trying to reconstruct a forest out of broken branches and withered leaves. In the fairy book, everything was just as it should be, though whether in words or something else I cannot tell. It glowed and flashed the thoughts upon the soul, with such a power that the medium disappeared from the consciousness, and it was occupied only with the things themselves. My representation of it must resemble a translation from a rich and powerful language, capable of embodying the thoughts of a splendidly developed people into the meager and half-articulate speech of a savage tribe. Of course, while I read it, I was Cosmo, and this history was mine. Yet all the time I seemed to have a kind of double consciousness, and the story a double meaning. Sometimes it seemed only to represent a simple story of ordinary life, perhaps almost of universal life, wherein two souls loving each other, and longing to come nearer, do after all but behold each other as in a glass darkly. As through the hard rock go to the branching silver veins, as into the solid land run the creeks and gulfs from the unresting sea, as the lights and influences of the upper world sink silently through the earth's atmosphere, so doth Faerie invade the world of men, and sometimes startle the common eye with an association as of cause and effect, when between the two no connecting links can be traced. Cosmo von Verstal was a student at the University of Prague. Though of a noble family, he was poor, and prided himself upon the independence that poverty gives. For what will not a man pride himself upon, when he cannot get rid of it? A favorite with his fellow students, he had yet had no companions, and none of them had crossed the threshold of his lodging into the top of one of the highest houses in the old town. Indeed, the secret of much of that complacence which recommended him to his fellows was the thought of his unknown retreat, whether in the evening he could betake himself and indulge undisturbed in his own studies and reveries. These studies, besides those subjects necessary to his course at the university, embrace some less commonly known and approved, for in a secret drawer lay the works of Albertus Magnus and Cornelius Agrippa, along with others less read and more abstruse. As yet, however, he had followed these researches only from curiosity, and had turned them to no practical purpose. His lodging consisted of one large, low-ceiled room, singularly bare of furniture, for beside a couple of wooden chairs, a couch which served for dreaming on both by day and night, and a great press of black oak, which was very little in the room that could be called furniture. But curious instruments were heaped in the corners, and in one stood a skeleton, half leaning against the wall, half supported by a string about its neck. One of its hands, all of fingers, rested on the heavy pommel of a great sword that stood beside it. Various weapons were scattered about over the floor. The walls were utterly bare of adornment, for the very strange things, such as the large dried bat with wings wide spread, the skin of a porcupine, and a stuffed sea mouse, could hardly be reckoned as such. But although his fancy delighted in vagaries like these, he indulged his imagination with a far different fare. His mind had never yet been filled with an absorbing passion, but it lay like a still twilight open to any wind, whether the low breath that wafts but odors, or the storm that bows the great trees till they strain and creak. He saw everything as through a rose-colored glass. When he looked from his window on the street below, not a maiden passed. Much he moved as in a story, and drew his thoughts after her till she disappeared in the vista. When he walked in the streets, he always felt as if reading a tale, into which he sought to weave every face of interest that went by, and every sweet voice swept his soul as with the wing of a passing angel. He was in fact a poet without words, the more absorbed and endangered that the spring waters were dammed back into his soul, where finding no utterance they grew and swelled and undermined. He used to lie on his hard couch and read a tale or a poem, till the book dropped from his hand. But he dreamed on, he knew not whether awake or asleep, until the opposite roof grew upon his senses and turned golden in the sunrise. Then he arose too, and the impulses of vigorous youth kept him ever active, either in study or in sport, until again the close of the day let him free, and the world of night, which had lain drowned in the cataract of the day, rose up in his soul, with all its stars and dim-seen phantom shapes. But this could hardly last long. Some one form must sooner or later step within the charmed circle, enter the house of life, and compel the bewildered magician to kneel and worship. One afternoon towards dusk, he was wandering dreamily in one of the principal streets, when a fellow student roused him by a slap on the shoulder and asked him to accompany him into a little back alley to look at some old armor which he had taken a fancy to possess. Cosmo was considered an authority in every matter pertaining to arms, ancient or modern, and the use of weapons. None of the students could come near him, and his practical acquaintance with some had principally contributed to establish his authority in reference to all, and accompanied him willingly. They entered a narrow alley, and thence a dirty little court, where a low arched door admitted to them a heterogeneous assemblage of everything musty and dusty and old that could well be imagined. His verdict on the armor was satisfactory, and his companion at once concluded the purchase. As they were leaving the place, Cosmo's eye was attracted by an old mirror of an elliptical shape, which leaned against the wall covered with dust. Around it was some curious carving, which he could see but very indistinctly by the glimmering light which the owner of the shop carried in his hand. It was this carving that attracted his attention, at least so it appeared to him. He left the place, however, with his friend, taking no further notice of it. They walked together to the main street, where they parted and took opposite directions. No sooner was Cosmo left alone than the thought of the curious old mirror returned to him. A strong desire to see it more plainly arose within him, and he directed his steps once more towards the shop. The owner opened the door when he knocked, as if it expected him. He was a little old, withered man with a hooked nose and burning eyes constantly in a slow, restless motion, and looked here and there as if after something that eluded them. Pretending to examine several other articles, Cosmo at last approached the mirror and requested to have it taken down. "Take it down yourself, master. I cannot reach it," said the old man. Cosmo took it down carefully, when he saw that the carving was indeed delicate and costly, being both of admirable design and execution, containing withal many devices which seemed to embody some meaning to which he had no clue. This, naturally one of his tastes and temperament, increased the interest he felt in the old mirror, so much indeed that he now longed to possess it, in order to study its frame at his leisure. He pretended, however, to want it only for use, and saying he feared the plate could be of little service as it was rather old, he brushed away a little of the dust from its face, expecting to see a dull reflection within. His surprise was great when he found the reflection brilliant, revealing a glass not only uninjured by age, but wondrously clear and perfect. Should the whole correspond to this part, even for one newly from the hands of the maker? He asked carelessly what the owner wanted the thing. The owner replied by mentioning a sum of money far beyond the reach of poor Cosmo, which proceeded to replace the mirror we had sold before. "You think the price too high, Gilman?" "I do not know that it is too much for you to ask," replied Cosmo. "It is far too much for me to give." The old man held up his light toward Cosmo's face. "I like your look," said he. Cosmo could return the compliment. In fact, now he looked closely at the man for the first time. He felt a kind of repugnance to him, mingled with a strange feeling of doubt whether a man or a woman stood before him. "What is your name?" he continued. "Cosmo von Verstal." "Ah, that's much. See your father in you. I knew your father very well, young sir. I dare say in some odd corners of my house you might find some old things with his crest and cipher upon them still. But I like you. You shall have the mirror at the fourth part of what I ask for it, but upon one condition." "What is that?" said Cosmo. The price was still a great deal to him to give. He could just manage it. The desire to possess the mirror had increased to an altogether unaccountable degree since it seemed beyond his reach. "That, should we ever want to get rid of it again, you will let me have the first offer." "Certainly," replied Cosmo with a smiling. "A moderate condition indeed." "On your honor?" insisted the seller. "On my honor," said the buyer, when the bargain was concluded. "Carry it home for you," said the old man as Cosmo took it in his hands. No, I will carry it myself," said he, for he had a peculiar dislike to revealing his residence to anyone, and more especially to this person, to whom he felt every moment a greater antipathy. "Just as you please," said the old creature, and muttered to himself as he held his light at the door to show him out of the court. "Sold for the 6th time. I wonder what will be the upshot of it this time. I should think my lady had enough of it by now." Cosmo carried his prize carefully home, with all the way yet uncomfortable feeling that he was watched and dogged. Repeatedly he looked out, but saw nothing to justify his suspicions. Indeed, the streets were too crowded and too ill-lighted to expose very readily a careful spy. As such there should be at his heels, he reached his lodging in safety, and leaned his purchase against the wall, rather relieved, strong as he was, to be rid of its weight. Then lifting his pipe, threw himself on the couch, and was soon lapped in the folds of one of his haunting dreams. He then carefully wiped away the dust from it. He returned home earlier than usual the next day and fixed the mirror to the wall, over the hearth at one end of his long room. He then carefully wiped away the dust from its face, and clear as the water of a sunny spring the mirror shone out from beneath the envious covering. But his interest was chiefly occupied with the curious carving of the frame. This he cleaned as well as he could with a brush, and then he proceeded to a minute examination of its various parts, in the hope of discovering some index to the intention of the carver. In this, however, he was unsuccessful, and at length, pausing with some weariness and disappointment, he gazed vacantly for a few moments into the depth of the reflected room. But ere long he said, half aloud, "What a strange thing a mirror is, and what a wondrous affinity exists between it and a man's imagination. For this room of mine, as I behold it in the glass, is the same, and yet not the same. It is not the mere representation of the room I live, but looks just as if I were reading about it a story I like. All of its commonness has disappeared. The mirror had lifted was otherwise hard and bare, just as one sees with delight upon the stage of representations of a character from which one could escape in life as from something unendurably wearisome. But as it not rather than art rescues nature from the weary and sated regards of our senses, and degrading injustice of our anxious everyday life, and appealing to the imagination, which dwells apart, reveals nature in some degree as she really is, and as she represents herself to the eye of the child, whose everyday life, fearless and unambitious, meets the true import of the wonder-teeming world around him, and rejoices therein without questioning. That skeleton now, I almost fear it, standing there so still with eyes only for the unseen, like a watchtower looking across all the waste of this busy world into the quiet regions of the rest beyond. And yet I know every bone and every joint in it, as well as my own fist, and that old battle-axe look as if any moment it might be caught up by a mailed hand, and borne forth by the mighty arm, go crashing through casque and skull and brain, invading the unknown with yet another bewildering ghost. I should like to live in that room if only I could get into it." Scarcely had the half-molded words floated up from him, as he stood gazing into the mirror, when striking him as with a flash of amazement that fixed him in his posture, noiseless and unannounced, glided suddenly through the door into the reflected room with stately motion, yet reluctant and faltering step, the graceful form of a woman, clothed all in white. Her back only was visible as she walked slowly up to the couch in the further end of the room, on which she laid herself wearily, turning back towards him a face of unutterly loveliness, in which suffering and dislike, and a sense of compulsion strangely mingled with the beauty. He stood without the power of motion for some moments, with his eyes recoverably fixed upon her, and even after he was conscious of the ability to move, he could not summon up courage to turn and look at her face to face, in the veritable chamber in which he stood. At length, with a sudden effort, in which the exercise of will was so pure that it seemed involuntary, he turned his face to the couch. It was vacant. In bewilderment mingled with terror, he tuned again to the mirror there. On the reflected couch lay the exquisite lady form. She lay with closed eyes, whence 2 large tears were just welling from beneath the veiling lids, still as death save for the convulsive motion of her bosom. Cosmo himself could not have described what he felt. His emotions were of a kind that destroyed consciousness, and could never be clearly recalled. He could not help standing yet by the mirror, keeping his eyes fixed on the lady, though he was painfully aware of his rudeness, and feared every moment that she would open hers and meet his fixed regard. But he was ere long a little relieved, for after a while her eyelids slowly rose, and her eyes remained uncovered, but unemployed for a time, and when at last they began to wander about the room, as if languidly seeking to make some acquaintance with her environment, they were never directed towards him. Sorry, I lost my place. Hold on. Never directed towards him, it seemed nothing but what was in the mirror could affect her vision, and therefore, if she saw him at all, it could only be his back, which of necessity was turned toward her in the glass. The two figures in the mirror could not meet face to face, except he turned and looked at her, present in his room, and as she was not there, he concluded that if he were to turn towards the part in his room corresponding to that which he lay, his reflection would either be invisible to her altogether, or at least it must appear to her to gaze vacantly towards her, and no meeting of eyes would produce the impression of spiritual proximity. By and by her eyes fell upon the skeleton, and he saw her shudder and close them. She did not open them again, but signs of repugnance continued evident on her countenance. Cosmo would have removed the obnoxious thing at once, but he feared to discompose her yet more by the assertion of his presence which the act would involve. So he stood and watched her, the eyelids yet shrouded the eyes, as a costly case the jewels within. The troubling expression gradually faded from the countenance, leaving only a faint sorrow behind. The features settled into an unchanging expression of rest, and by these signs and the slow regular motion of her breathing, Cosmo knew that she slept. He could now gaze on her without embarrassment. He saw that her figure, dressed in the simplest robe of white, was worthy of her face, and so harmonious that either the delicately molded foot or any finger of the equally delicate hand was an index to the whole. As she lay, her whole form manifested by the relaxation of perfect repose, he gazed till he was weary, and seated himself near the new-found shrine, and mechanically took up a book, like one who watches by a sick-bed. But his eyes gathered no thoughts from the page before him. His intellect had been stunned by the bold contradiction to its face of all its experience, and now lay passive, without assertion or speculation, or even conscious astonishment, while his imagination set one wild dream of blessedness after another soul. How long he sat, he knew not, but at length he roused himself, rose, and trembling in every portion of his frame, looked again into the mirror. She was gone. The mirror reflected faithfully with his presented, and nothing more. It stood there like a gold setting wherein the central jewel had been stolen away, like a night sky without the glory of its stars. She had carried with her all the strangeness of the reflected room. It had sunk to the level of the one without. But when the first pangs of his disappointment had been past, Cosmo began to comfort himself with the hope that she might return the next evening at the same hour, resolving that if she did that, she should not at least be scared by the hateful skeleton. He removed that and several other articles of questioning appearance into a recess by the side of the hearth, whence they could not possibly cast any reflection into the mirror, and having made his poor room as tidy as he could, sought the solace of the open sky of a night wind that had begun to blow, for he could not rest where he was. Then he returned, somewhat composed. He could hardly prevail with himself to lie down on his bed, for he could not help feeling as if she had lain upon it. For him to lie there now would be something like sacrilege. However, weariness prevailed, and laying himself on the couch, dressed as he was, he slept till day. The beating heart, beating till he could breathe, he stood in dumb hope before the mirror. On the following evening, again the room shone as through a purple vapor in the gathering twilight. Everything seemed waiting like himself for a coming splendor to glorify its poor earthliness, with the presence of a heavenly joy. And just as the room vibrated with the strokes of the neighboring church bell, announcing the hour of 6, in glided the pale beauty, and again laid herself on the couch. Poor Cosmo nearly lost his senses with delight. She was there once more. Her eyes sought the corner where the skeleton had stood, and a faint gleam of satisfaction crossed her face, apparently at seeing it empty. She looked suffering still, but there was less of a discomfort expressed in her countenance than there had been the night before. She took more notice of the things about her, and seemed to gaze with some curiosity on the strange apparatus standing here and there in her room. At length, however, drowsiness seemed to overtake her, and again she fell asleep, resolved not to lose sight of her this time. Cosmo watched the sleeping form. Her slumber was so deep and absorbing that the repose seemed to pass contagiously from her to him as he gazed upon her, and he started as if from a dream, when the lady moved and without opening her eyes, and rose and passed with the gait of a somnambulist. Cosmo was now in a state of extravagant delight. Most men have a secret treasure somewhere. The miser has his golden hoard, the virtuoso his pet ring, the student his rare book, the poet his favorite haunt, the lover his secret drawer. But Cosmo had a mirror of a lovely lady in it, and now that he knew by the kitchen, and now that he knew by the skeleton that she was affected by the things around her, he had a new object in life. He would turn the bare chamber of the mirror into a room such as no lady need disdain to call her own. This he could only effect by furnishing adorning his. And Cosmo was poor, yet he possessed accomplishments that could be turned to account, although hitherto he had preferred living on his slender allowance, to increase this means by what his pride considered unworthy of his rank. He was the best swordsman in the university, and now he offered to give lessons in fencing and similar exercises to such as chose to pay him well for the trouble. His proposal was heard with surprise by the students, but it was eagerly accepted by many, and soon his instructions were not confined to the richer students, but were anxiously sought by many of the younger nobility of Prague and its neighborhood. Very soon he had a deal of money at his command. The first thing he did was to remove his apparatus and oddities into a closet in the room. Then he placed his bed and a few other necessities on each side of the hearth, and parted them from the rest of the room by a screen of Indian fabric. Then he put an elegant couch for the lady to lie upon, in the corner where his bed had formerly stood, and by degrees, every day adding some article of luxury, converted at length into a rich boudoir. Every night around the same time the lady entered. The first time she saw the new couch, she stared with a half-smile. Then her face grew very sad, and tears came to her eye, and she laid herself upon the couch, and pressed her face into the silken cushions, as if to hide from everything. She took notice of each addition, and each change as the work proceeded, a look of acknowledgment, as if she knew that someone was ministering to her, and was grateful for it, mingled with the constant look of suffering. At length, after she had laid down as usual one evening, her eyes fell upon some paintings, with which Cosmo had just finished adorning the walls. She rose, and to his great delight, walked across the room and proceeded to examine them carefully, testifying her pleasure in her looks as she did so. But again the sorrowful, tearful expression returned, and again she buried her face in the pillows of her couch. Gradually, however, her countenance had grown more composed. Much of the suffering manifest on her first appearance had vanished, and a kind of quiet, hopeful expression had taken its place, which, however, frequently gave way to an anxious, troubled look, mingled with something of sympathetic pity. Meantime, how fared Cosmo? As might be expected in one of his temperament, his interest had blossomed into love, and his love, shall I call it ripened or withered into passion? But alas, he loved a shadow. He could not come near her, could not speak to her, could not hear a sound from those sweet lips, to which his longing eyes would cling to like bees to their honey founts. Ever and anon he sang to himself, "I shall die for the love of the maiden." And ever he looked again, and died not, although his heart seemed ready to break with the intensity of life and longing. And the more he did for her, the more he loved her, and he hoped that, although she never appeared to see him, yet she was pleased to think that one unknown would give his life to her. He tried to comfort himself over his separation from her by thinking that perhaps some day she would see him and make signs to him, and that would satisfy him. For, thought he, is not this all that loving soul can do, to enter in communion with another? Nay, how many who love never come near it them to behold each other as mirror, seeming to know, and yet never know the inward life, never enter the other soul, and partly at last but with a vague notion of the universe and the borders of which they had been hovering for a year. If I could but speak to her, and knew that she heard me, I should be satisfied. Once he contemplated painting a picture on the wall, which should, of necessity, convey to the lady a thought of himself. But, though he had some skill with the pencil, he found his hand tremble so much that when he began to attempt, he was forced to give it up. Who lives, he dies. Who dies, he is alive. Okay, we got an ad break incoming, so we're going to go to that, and then we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Okay. He looked again and died not, though his heart seemed ready to break with the intensity of life and longing. The more he did for her, the more he loved her, and they... Oh, wait. Okay, wait, I've read that part. That's my bad. Okay. One evening, as he stood gazing at this treasure, he saw a faint expression of self-consciousness on her countenance, as he surmised that passionate eyes were fixed upon her. This grew till at last the red blood rose over her neck, cheek, and brow. As when longing to approach her, it became almost delirious. This night she was dressed in an evening costume resplendent with diamonds. This could add nothing to her beauty, but it presented it in a new aspect, and enabled her loveliness to make a new manifestation of itself in a new embodiment. For essential for for essential beauty is infinite, and as the soul of nature needs an endless succession of varied forms to embody her loveliness, countless faces of beauty springing forth, not any two the same at any one of her heartthrobs. So the individual form needs an infinite change of its environments to enable it to uncover all the phases of its loveliness. Diamonds glittered from amidst her hair, half hidden and luxurious, like stars through dark rain clouds, and the bracelets on her white arms flashed all the colors of a rainbow off lightnings. As she lifted her snowy hands to cover her burning face, but her beauty shone down all its adornment. If I might have one of her feet to kiss, thought Cosmo, I should be content. Alas, he deceived himself, for passion is never content. Nor did he know that there are two ways out of her enchanted house. But suddenly, as if the pang had been driven into his heart from without, revealing itself first in pain and afterwards in a definite form, the thought darted in his mind, she has a lover somewhere. Remembered words of his bring the color on her face now. I am nowhere to her. She lives in another world all day and night. After she leaves me, what does she come and me love her till I, a strong man, am too faint to look upon her more? He looked again, and her face was pale as a lily. A sorrowful compassion seemed to rebuke the glitter of the restless jewels, and the slow tears rose in her eyes. She left her room sooner this evening than was her wont. Cosmo remained alone with a feeling as if his bosom had left empty and hollow, and the weight of the whole world was crushing in its walls. The next evening, for the first time, she began to come. For the first time since she began to come, she came not, and now Cosmo was in a wretched plight. Since the thought of arrival had occurred to him, he could not rest for a moment more than he ever longed to see the lady face to face. He persuaded himself that he but knew the worst he would be satisfied, for then he could abandon Prague and find that relief in the constant motion, which is the hope of all active minds when invaded by distress. Meantime, he waited with unspeakable anxiety for the next night, hoping she would return, but she did not appear. And now he fell really ill. Rallied by his fellow students on his wretched looks, he ceased to attend the lectures. His engagements were neglected. He cared for nothing. The sky with the great sun in it was to him a heartless, burning desert. The men and women in their streets were mere puppets, without motives in themselves or interest to him. He saw he saw them all as the ever-changing field of a camera obscura. She alone and altogether was his universe, his well of life, his incarnate good. For 6 evenings she came not, that his absorbing passion, slow fever that was consuming his brain, be his excuse for the resolution which he had taken and begun to execute. Before that time had expired, reasoning with himself that it must be by some enchantment connected with the mirror that the form of the lady was to be seen it, he determined to turn to account what he had hitherto studied principally from curiosity. For, said he to himself, if a spell can force her presence in that glass, she came unwillingly at first, may not a stronger spell, such as I know, especially with the aid of her half-presence in the mirror, if she ever appears again, compel her living form to come to me here. If I do her wrong, let love be my excuse. I want only to know what my doom from her own lips. He never doubted all the time that there was a real earthly woman, or rather there was a woman who somehow or other threw his reflection of her form into the magic mirror. He opened his secret drawer, took out his books of magic, lighted his lamp, and read and made notes from midnight till 3 in the morning, for 3 successive nights. Then he replaced his books, and the next night went out in quest of the materials necessary for the conjuration. They were not easy to find. When love charms with all incantations of this nature, ingredients are employed scarcely fit to be mentioned, and for the thought of even of which, in connection with her, he would only excuse himself on the score of his bitter need. At length he succeeded in procuring all that he required, and on the 7th evening from which she had last appeared, he found himself prepared to the exercise of unlawful and tyrannical power. He cleared the center of the room, stooped into a circle of red on the floor, around the spot where he stood, wrote into 4 quarters mystical signs, numbers which were all powers of 7 or 9, examined the whole ring carefully to see that no small break had occurred in the circumference, then arose from his bending posture. As he rose, the church struck 7, and just as she had appeared the first time, reluctantly, slowly, and stately glided in the lady. Cosmo trembled, and when turning, he revealed the countenance worn and wan, as with sickness or inward trouble. He grew faint and felt as if he dared not proceed. But as he gazed at the face and form which now possessed his whole soul, the exclusion of all other joys and griefs, the longing to speak to her, to know that she heard him, to hear from her one word in return, became so endurable that he suddenly and hastily resumed his preparations. Stepping carefully from the circle, he put a small brazier into its center. He then set fire to the contents of charcoal, and while it burned up, opened his window and seated himself, waiting beside it. It was a sultry evening. The air was full of thunder. A sense of luxurious depression filled the brain. The sky seemed to have grown heavy, to compress the air beneath it. A kind of purplish tinge pervaded the atmosphere. Through the opening window came the scent of the distant fields, with all the vapors of the city could not quench. Soon the charcoal glowed. Cosmo sprinkled upon the incense and other substance which it compounded, and stepping within the circle, turned his face from the brazier and towards the mirror. Then, fixing his eyes upon the face of the lady, he began with a trembling voice to repeat a powerful incantation. He had not gone far before the lady grew pale, and then, like a returning wave, the blood washed all its blanks with its crimson tide, and she hid her face in her hands. Then he passed to a conjuration stronger yet. The lady rose and walked uneasily to and fro in her room. Another spell, and she seemed seeking with her eyes for some object on which they wished to rest. At length, it seemed as if she suddenly espied him, for her eyes fixed themselves full and wide upon his, and she drew gradually and somewhat unwillingly close to her side of the mirror, just as if his eyes had fascinated her. Cosmo had never seen her before, so near before. Last eyes met eyes, but he could not quite understand the expression of hers. They were full of tender entreaty, but there was something more that he could not interpret, though his heart seemed to labor in his throat. He would allow no delight or agitation to turn him from his task. Looking still in her face, he passed on the mightiest charm he knew. Suddenly the lady turned and walked out of the door of his reflected chamber. A moment before she entered his room with fertile presence, and forgetting all his precaution, he sprang from the charmed circle and knelt before her. There she stood, the living lady of the passionate visions, alone beside him in a thundery twilight, with the glow of a magic fire. "Why," said the lady with a trembling voice, "didst thou bring a poor maiden through the rainy streets alone?" "Because I am dying for love of thee. But I only brought thee from the mirror there. The mirror," she looked upon and shuddered. "So I am but a slave, while that mirror exists. Do not think it was the power of thy spells that drew me. It was thy longing desire to see me beat at the door of my heart till I was forced to yield." "Canst thou love me, then?" said Cosmo in as calm as death, but almost inarticulate with emotion. "I do not know," she replied sadly. "I cannot tell, so long as I am bewildered with enchantments. Were indeed a joy too great, to lay my head on thy bosom and bleed to death. I think thou lovest me, though I do not know, but—" Cosmo rose from his knees. "I love thee as nay, I know not what. Since I have loved thee, there is nothing else." He seized her hand, and she withdrew it. "No, better not. I'm in thy power, and therefore I may not." She burst into tears, and leaning before her turn, said, "So, if thou lovest me, set me free, even from thyself. Break the mirror. Shall I see thyself instead? That I cannot tell thee. I will not deceive thee. We may never meet again." A fierce struggle arose in Cosmo's bosom. Now she was in his power. She did not dislike him, at least, and he could not see her when he would. To break the mirror would be destroy his very life, to banish out of the universe the only glory it possessed. The whole world would be but a prison, if he annihilated the one window that looked into the paradise of love. Not yet pure in love, he hesitated. Sorrow, the lady rose to her feet. "Ah, he loves me not, he loves me not, even as I love him, and alas, I care more for his love than for the freedom I ask." "I will not wait to be willing," cried Crossbow, and sprang to the corner where the great sword stood. Meantime it had grown very dark. Only the embers cast a red glow through the room. He seized the sword by the steel scabbard, stood before the mirror, but as he heaved a great blow at with the heavy pommel, the blade slipped halfway out of the scabbard, and the pommel struck the wall above the mirror. That moment, a terrible clap of thunder seemed to burst in the room beside them, and ere Cosmo could repeat the blow, he fell senseless on the hearth. When he came to himself, he found that the lady and the mirror had both disappeared. He was seized with a brain fever, which kept him to his couch for weeks. When he recovered his reason, he began to think what had become of the mirror. For the lady, he hoped she had found her way as he came, but the mirror involved her fate with its own. He was more immediately anxious about that he could not think she had carried it away. It was much too heavy, even if he had not been too firmly fixed on the wall, for her to remove it. Then again, he remembered the thunder, which made him believe that it was not the lightning, but some other blow that had struck him down. He concluded that either by supernatural agency, he having exposed himself to the vengeance of the demons and leaving the circle of safety, or in some other mode, the mirror had probably found its way back to former owner. Horrible to think of, might have been, at this time, once more disposed of, delivering up the lady into the power of another man, who, if he used his power no worse than he himself had done, might yet give Cosmo abundant cause to curse the selfish indecision which prevented him from shattering the mirror at once. Indeed, to think that she who he loved, and who had prayed to him for freedom, should still be at the mercy in some degree or possession of the mirror, was at least exposed to his constant observations, was in itself enough to madden a chary lover. Anxiety to be well uh uh Anxiety to be well retarded his recovery, but at length he was able to creep abroad. But first made his way to the old broker's, pretending to be in search of something else. A laughing sneer on the creature's face convinced him that he knew all about it, but he would not see it amongst his furniture, or get any information out of him as to what had become of it. He expressed the utmost surprise in hearing it had been stolen. A surprise which Cosmo saw at once to be counterfeited. At the same time, He fancied that the old wretch was not at all anxious to have mistook it for genuine. Full of distress, which he concealed as well as he could, he made many searches, with no avail. Of course, he could ask no questions, but he kept his ears awake for any momentous hint that might set him of a direction of search. He never went on without a short, heavy hammer of steel about him, that he might shatter the mirror the moment he was made happy by the sight of his lost treasure, if ever that blessed moment should arrive. Whether he would see the lady again was now a thought altogether secondary, and postponed to the achievement of her freedom. He wandered here and there like an anxious ghost, pale and haggard, gnawed over at the heart by the thought of what she might be suffering, all from his fault. One night, he mingled with the crowd that filled the room of one of the most distinguished mansions in the city, for he accepted every invitation, that he might lose no chance of obtaining some information that might expedite his discovery. Here he wandered about, listening to every stray word he could catch in hope of the revelation, as he approached some ladies who were taking quietly in a corner. One said to another, "Have you heard of the strange illness of the Princess von Hohenweiss? She's been ill for more than a year now. It is a secret to have such a terrible malady. She was better for some weeks lately, but within the last few days the same attacks have returned, apparently accompanied with more suffering than ever. It's an altogether inexplicable story." "Is there a story connected with her illness?" "I've only heard imperfect reports, but as it is said that she gave offense to 18 months ago to an old woman who had held an office of trust in the family, and who, after some incoherent threats, disappeared. The peculiar affections followed soon after, but the strangest part of the story is its association with the loss of an antique mirror, which stood in her dressing room, and which she constantly made use." Here the speaker's voice sank to a whisper. Cosmo, although his very soul sat listening in his ears, could hear no more. He trembled too much to dare to address the ladies, even if it had been impossible to expose himself to their curiosity. The name of the princess was well known to him, but he had never seen her, except indeed it was she, whom now he hardly doubted. He had knelt before him on the dreadful night, fearful of attracting attention, for from the weak state of his health he could not discover an appearance of calmness. He made his way to the open air and reached the lodgings, glad in this that at least he knew where she lived, although he never dreamed of approaching her openly, even if she should be happy enough to free her from her hateful bondage. He hoped, too, as he had unexpectedly learned so much, the other and far more important part might be revealed to him ere long. "Have you seen Steinwald lately?" "No, I have not seen him for some time. He is almost a match for me at the rapier, and I suppose he thinks he needs no more lessons. What's become of him? To see him very much. See, the last time I saw him, he was coming out of the old broker's den, which, if you remember, you accompanied me once, to look at some armor. That is fully 3 weeks ago." This hint was enough for Cosmo. Von Steinwald was a man of influence in the court, well known for his reckless habits and fierce passions. The very possibility that the mirror should be in his possession was hell itself to Cosmo. But violent or hasty means of any sort were most unlikely to succeed. All that he wanted was an opportunity of breaking the fatal glass. To obtain this, he must bide his time. He revolved many plans in his mind, but without being able to fix upon any. At length one evening, as he was passing the house of von Steinwald, he saw the windows usually brilliant. He watched for a while, and seeing that company began to arrive, hastened home and dressed as richly as he could, in the hope of mingling with the guests unquestioned, effecting which there could be no difficulty for a man of his carriage. In a lofty, silent chamber in another part of the city lay a form more like marble than a living woman. The loveliness of death seemed frozen upon her, for her lips were rigid and her eyelids closed. Her long white hands were crossed over her breast, and no breathing disturbed their repose. Beside the dead, men speak in whispers, as if the deepest rest of all could be broken by the sound of a living voice. Just so, but though the soul was evidently beyond the reach of all intimations for the senses, the two ladies who sat beside her spoke to the gentlest tones and subdued her. "She has lain so for an hour. This cannot last long, I fear. How much thinner has she grown within the last few weeks? If she could only speak and explain what she suffers. Better for her. I think she has visions in her trances. Nothing can induce her to refer to them when she is awake. Does she ever speak in these trances? Never heard her, but they say she walks sometimes, and once put the whole outside in a terrible fright by disappearing for a whole hour, and returning drenched with rain, almost dead with exhaustion and fright. But even then she would give no account of what happened. A scarce audible murmur from the yet motionless lips of the lady startled her attendants, and after several ineffectual attempts at articulation, the word Cosmo burst from her. Then she lay still as before, but only for a moment. With a wild cry, she sprang from the couch, erect on the floor, flung her arms above her head, with clasped and straining hands. Her eyes flashed with light, called aloud with a voice exultant as if spirit bursting from a sepulchre. Free! Free, I thank thee! Then she flung herself on the couch and sobbed, rose and paced wildly up and down the room with the gestures of mingled delight and anxiety. Then, turning to her motionless attendants, Quick, Lisa, my cloak and my hood. Laura, let's go to him. Make haste, Lisa. You may come with me if you will. In another moment, they were in the street, hurrying along towards one of the bridges over the Moldo. The moon was near the zenith, and the streets were almost empty. The princess soon outstripped her attendant, and was halfway over to the bridge before the other reached it. Are you free, lady? The mirror is broken. Are you free? The words were spoken close beside her as she hurried on. She turned, and there, leaning on the parapet in the recess of a bridge, stood Cosmo in a splendid dress, but with a white, quivering face. Cosmo, I am free. Thy servant forever. I come to you now, and I to you. For death made me bold, but I could get no further. Have I atoned at all? Do I love you a little truly? I know now that you love me, my Cosmo. But what do you say about death? He did not reply. His hand was pressed against his side. She looked more closely. The blood was welling from between the fingers. She flung her arms around him with a faint, bitter wail. Lisa came up. She found her mistress kneeling above a wan dead face, which smiled on the spectral moonbeams. And now I will say no more about these wondrous volumes, although I could tell many a tale out of them, and could perhaps vaguely represent some entrancing thoughts of a deeper kind which I found within them. From many a sultry mooned twilight did I sit in that grand hall, buried and risen again in these old books. And I trust I have carried away in my soul some of the exhalations of their undying leaves. And after hours of deserved or needful sorrow, portions of what I read there have often come to me again, with an unexpected comforting, which was not fruitless, even though the comfort might seem in itself groundless and vain. That is the end of chapter 13. Okay. Alright, now on to chapter 14, yes. Your gallery. Have we passed through, not without much content, in many singularities, but we saw not that which my daughter came to look upon, the state of her mother. Winter's Tale. It seemed to me strange that all this time I had heard no music in the fairy palace. I was convinced there must be music in it, but that my sense was as yet too gross to receive the influence of those mysterious motions that beget sound. Sometimes I felt sure from the way of the few figures of which I got some transitory glimpses past me, or glided into vacancy before me, that they were moving into the law of music. In fact, several times I fancied for a moment that I had heard a few wondrous tones coming I knew not whence, but they did not last long enough to convince me that I had heard them with the bodily sense. Such as they were, however, they took strange liberties with me, causing me to burst suddenly into tears, of which there was no presence to make me ashamed, or casting me into a kind of trance of speechless delight, which passing as suddenly left me faint and longing for more. Now on an evening before I had been a week in the palace, I was wandering through one lighted arcade and corridor after another. At length I arrived, through a door that was that closed behind me, and another vast hall of the palace. It was filled with a subdued crimson light, by which I saw that slender pillars of black, built close to walls of white marble, rose to a great height, and then dividing into innumerable divergent arches, supported a roof like walls of white marble, upon which the arches intersected intricately, forming a fretting of black upon white, like the network of a skeleton leaf. The floor was black. Between several pairs of the pillars upon every side, the place of the wall behind was occupied by a crimson curtain of thick silk, hanging in heavy and rich folds. Behind each of the curtains burned a powerful light, and these were the sources of the glow that filled the hall. A peculiar, delicious odor pervaded the place. As soon as I entered, the old inspiration seemed to return to me, for I felt a strong impulse to sing, or rather, it seemed as if someone else was singing a song in my soul, which wanted to come forth at my lips, embodied in my breath. But I kept silent and feeling somewhat overcome by the red light and perfume, as well as by the emotion within me. In seeing at one end of the hall a great crimson chair, more like of a throne than a chair, beside a table of white marble, I went to it, and throwing myself in it, gave myself up to a succession of images of bewildering beauty, which passed before my inward eye in a long, occasional crowded train. Here I sat for hours, I suppose, till returning somewhat to myself, I saw that the red light had paled away, and felt the cool, gentle breaths gliding over my forehead. I rose and left the hall with unsteady steps, finding my way with some difficulty to my own chamber, and faintly remembering as I went on that only in the marble cave where I found the sleeping statue had I ever had a similar experience. After this, I repaired every morning to the same hall, when I sometimes sat in the chair and dreamed deliciously, and sometimes walked up inside over the black floor. Sometimes I acted within myself a whole drama during one of these perambulations, sometimes walked deliberately through the whole epic of a tale, sometimes ventured to sing a song, though with a shrinking fear I knew not what. I was astonished at the beauty of my own voice as it rang through the place, or rather crept undulating, like a serpent of sound, along the walls and roofs of this superb music hall. Entrancing verses arose within me as of their own accord, chanting verses to their own melodies, requiring no addition of music to satisfy the inward sense. But, ever in the pause of these, when the singing room was upon me, I seemed to hear something like the distant sound of multitude of dancers, and felt as if it was the unheard music, moving their rhythmic motion, that within me blossomed in verse and song. I felt, too, that I could but see the dance. I should, from the harmony of complicated movements, not of dancers, in relation to each other, merely, but of each dancer individually in the manifested plastic power that moved the consenting harmonious forms, understand the whole of the music on the billows which they floated and swung. Oh, which they floated and swung, excuse me. Makes more sense. At length, one night suddenly, when this feeling of dance came upon me, I thought me of lifting one of the crimson curtains and looking if perchance behind it there might not be hid some other mystery, which might at least remove a step further the bewilderment of the present one. Nor was I altogether disappointed. I walked to one of the magnificent draperies, lifted a corner, and peeped in. There burned a great crimson globe-shaped light, high in the cubical center of another hall, which might be larger or less than which I stood, for its dimensions were not easily perceived, seeing that the floor and walls were entirely black marble. The roof was supported by the same arrangement of pillars, radiating in arches as that of the first hall, only here the pillars and arches were of dark red, but what absorbed my delighted gaze was an innumerable assembly of white marble statues of every form and in multitudinous posture, filling the hall throughout. These stood in the ruddy glow of the great lamp, upon pedestals of jet black. Around the lamp shone in golden letters, plainly legible from where it stood, the two words, touch not. There was in all this, however, no solution to the sound of dancing, and now I was aware that the influence on my mind had ceased. I did not go in that evening, for I was weary and faint, but I hoarded up the expectation of entering as of a great coming joy. Next night I walked in as on the preceding through the hall. My mind was filled with pictures and songs, and therewith so much absorbed that I did not for some time think of looking within the curtain. I had it last night lifted. When the thought of doing so occurred to me, I happened to be within a few yards of it. I became conscious at the same moment that the sound of dancing had been for some time in my ears. I approached the curtain quickly, and lifting it, entered the black hall. Everything was as still as death. I should have concluded that the sound must have produced from some other, more distant quarter, which conclusion its faintness would, in ordinary circumstances, have necessitated from the first. But there was a something about the statues that caused me to remain in doubt. As I said, each stood perfectly still upon its black pedestal, but there was about every one a certain air, not of motion, but as if it had just ceased from movement, as if the rest were not altogether the marbly stillness of thousands of years. It was as if the peculiar atmosphere of each had yet a kind of invisible tremulousness, as if its agitated wavelets had not yet subsided into a perfect calm. I had the suspicion that they had anticipated my appearance and had sprung, each from the living joy of the dance, the dead silence and blackness of its isolated pedestal. Just before I entered, I walked across the central hall to the curtain opposite the one I had lifted, and entering there, found all the appearances similar, only that statues were different, and differently grouped. Neither did they produce on my mind the impression of motion just expired which I had experienced from the others. I found that behind every one of the crimson curtains was a similar hall, similarly lighted, and similarly occupied. And the next night, I did not allow my thoughts to be absorbed as before with inward images, but crept stealthily along to the furthest curtain in the hall, from behind which likewise I had formerly seemed to hear the sound of dancing. I drew aside to fledge as certainly as I could, and looking in saw that the utmost stillness pervaded the vast place. I walked in, and passed through it to the other end. There I found that it communicated with its circular corridor, divided from it only by 2 rows of red columns. This corridor, which was black with red niches holding statues, ran entirely about the statue halls, forming a communication between the further ends of them all. Further, that is, as the regards in central hall of the white, whence they all diverged like radii, finding their circumference in the corridor. Round this corridor I now went, entering all the halls, of which there were 12, and finding them all similarly constructed, but filled with quite various statues of what seemed both ancient and modern sculpture. After I had simply walked through them, I found myself sufficiently tired to long for rest, and went to my own room. The night I dreamed that, walked closely by one of the curtains, I was suddenly seized with a desire to enter, and darted in. This time I was too quick for them. All the statues were in motion, statues no longer, but men and women, all shapes of beauty that ever sprang from the brain of sculpture, mingled in the convolutions of a complicated dance. Passing through them to the further end, I almost stirred from my sleep on the beholding, not taking part in the dance with the others, nor seemingly excluded of life from them, but standing in marble coldness and rigidity upon a black pedestal in the extreme left corner, my lady of the cave, with the marble beauty who sprang for her tomb or cradle at the call of my songs. While I gazed in speechless astonishment and admiration, a dark shadow descended from above like the curtains of a stage, gradually hid her entirely from my view. I felt with a shudder that this shadow was perchance my missing demon whom I had not seen for days. I awoke with a stifled cry. Of course, the next evening I began my journey through the halls, for I knew not to which my dream had carried me, in the hope of proving the dream to be a true one by discovering my marble beauty upon her black pedestal. At length, on reaching the 10th hall, I thought I recognized some of the forms I had seen dancing in my dream. To my bewilderment, when I arrived at the extreme corner on the left, there stood the only one I had yet seen, a vacant pedestal. It was exactly in the position occupied in my dream by the pedestal in which the White Lady stood. Hope beat violently in my heart. Now, said I to myself, if yet another part of the dream would come true, I succeed in surprising these forms in their nightly dance. It might be the rest would follow, and I should see on the pedestal my marble queen. Then surely my song sufficed to give her life before, where she lay in the bonds of alabaster. Much more they will do sufficient, when to give her own volition and motion, when she alone of assembled crowds of marbled forms would be standing rigid and cold. But the difficulty was to surprise the dancers. I found that a premeditated attempt at surprise, though executed with utmost care and rapidity, was of no avail. My dream, it was affected by a sudden thought, and suddenly executed. I saw therefore that there was no plan of operation offering any probability of its success but this, to allow my mind to be occupied with other thoughts, as I wandered through the great hall, and so wait till the impulse to enter one of the others should happen to arise in me just at the moment when I was close to one of the crimson curtains. For if I hoped that if I entered one of the 12 halls, the right moment that was for the gift the right of entrance to all the others, seeing that they had all communicated behind, I would not diminish the hope of the right chance by supposing it was necessary the desire to enter should awake within me, precisely when I was close to the curtains of the 10th hall. At first the impulse to see recurred so continually in spite of the crowded imageries that kept passing through my mind. They too formed too nearly a continuous claim for the hope that one of them would succeed in a surprise, but as I persisted in banishing them, it required less and less often, and after 2 or 3, at considerable intervals, had come when the spot before I happened to me was unsuitable. The hope was strengthened that soon one might just as the right moment, namely, when walking around the hall, I should be close to one of them. At length the right moment and impulse coincided. I darted into the 9th hall. It was full of the most exquisite moving forms. The whole space was wavered and swam with the involutions of an intricate dance. I seemed to break suddenly as I entered, and all made 1 or 2 bounds toward their pedestals. Apparently on finding that they were thoroughly overtaken, they returned to their enjoyment, for it seemed that with them earnest enough to be called such, without further heeding, somewhat inflated by the floating cloud, I made what haste I could towards the bottom of the hall, whence entering the corridor I turned towards the 10th. I soon arrived at the corner I wanted to reach, for the corridor was comparably empty, but although the dancers were there, after a little confusion, altogether disregarded my presence, I was dismayed at beholding, upon yet a vacant pedestal. But I had conviction that she was near me, and I looked at the pedestal, thought I saw upon it, vaguely revealed as if through overlapping folds or drapery, the distinct outlines of white feet, yet there were no signs of drapery or concealing shadow whatever. But I remembered the descending shadow in my dream, and I hoped still in the powder of my songs, thinking that they could dispel alabaster, yet likewise be capable of dispelling what concealed my beauty now, even if it were the demon whose darkness had overshadowed all my life. Okay, and then it's chapter 14. We're doing progress-wise. Hold on. Okay, 14. 15. Okay, chapter 25. Alexander, when will you finish Campaspe? Apelles, never finished, for always in absolute beauty. There is somewhat above art. Lili's Campaspe. And now what song should I sing to unveil my Isis if indeed she was present unseen. I hurried away to the wide hall of fantasy, heedless of the innumerable forms of beauty that crowded my way. These might cross my eyes, but the unseen filled my brain. I wandered long up and down the silent space. No songs came. My soul was not still enough for songs. Only in the silence and darkness of the soul's night do those stars of the inward firmament sing to its lower surface. From the realms beyond and the shine upon the conscious spirit. Here all effort was unavailing. If they came not, they could not be found. Next night it was just the same. I walked through the red glimmer of the silent hall, but lonely as there I walked. Lonely trod my soul up and down the halls of the brain. At last I entered one of the statue halls. The dance had just commenced, and I was delighted to find that I was free of their assembly. I walked on until I came to the sacred corner. There I found the pedestal just as I had left. Faint glimmer of a white feet still resting on the dead black. As soon as I saw it, I seemed to feel a presence which longed to become visible, as it were, called to me to gift with self-manifestation, that it might shine on me. The power of song came upon me, but the moment to my voice, a voice sang low and soft, stirred the air of the hall. The dancers started. The quick intervening crowd shook, lost its form, divided. Each figure sprang to its pedestal and stood, a self-evolved life no more, but a rigid, lifelike marble shape, with the whole form composed with the expression of a single state of act. Silence rolled like a spiritual thunder through the grand space. My song had ceased, scared at its own influences, but I saw in the hand of one of the statues close by a harp whose chords yet quivered. I remember that as she bounded past me, her harp had brushed against my arm, so the spell of the marble had not enfolded it. I sprang to her, and with a gesture of entreaty, laid my hand on the harp, the marbled hand, probably from its contact with the unchained harp, strength enough to relax its hold and yield the harp to me. No other motion indicated life. Instinctively, I struck the chords and sang, and not to break upon the record of my song I mentioned here, as I sang the first 4 lines, the loveliest feet became clear upon the black pedestal, and ever as I sang, it was as if a veil were being lifted up from before the form, but an invisible veil, so that the statue appeared to grow before me, not so much by evolution, as by infinitesimal degrees of added height. And while I sang, I did not feel that I stood by a statue, as indeed it appeared to me, but that a real woman's soul was revealing itself by successive stages of embodiment and consequent manifestation of expression. Feet of beauty firmly planting, arches white on rosy heel, whence the life springing, throbbing, panting, pulse upward to reveal. Fairest things no least despising, foot and earth meet tenderly. 'Tis the woman resting rising upward to sublimity. Rise the limbs stately sloping, strong and gentle, full and free, soft and slow like certain hoping, drawing nigh the broad firm knee. Up to speech, as up to roses, pants the life from leaf to flower, so each blending that changes discloses nearer still expression's power. Lo, fair sweeps, white surges, twining up and outward fearlessly, temple columns, close combining, lift a holy mystery. Heart of mine, what strange surprises, mount aloft on such a stair. Some great vision upward rises, curving, bending, floating fair. Bends and sweeps, and hill and hollow, lead my fascinated eye. Some apocalypse will follow, some new world of deity, zone unseen, and outward swelling, with new thoughts and wonders rife. Queenly majesty foretelling, see the expounding house of life. Sudden heaving, unbroken, sighs eternal, till the same. Mounts of snow have summits hidden in the midst of uttered flame. But the spirit of dawning nearly finds no speech for earnest pain, finds a soulless sighting merely, build its stairs and mounts again. Heart the queen with secret hoping, sendeth out her waiting part, hands, blind hands half blindly groping, half enclasping visions rare, the great arms heartway bending, might of beauty, drawing home, there returning and reblending, where by roots of love they roam. Build thy slopes of radiance beamy, spirit fair with womanhood, tower thy precipice white gleamy, climb unto the hour of good. Dumb space will be rent asunder. Now the shining column stands, ready to be crowned with wondrous by the builder's joyous hands. All the lines abroad are spreading, like a fountain's failing race. Low the chin first feature treating, airy foot to rest the face. Sweet is nigh, oh see the blushing, sweet approach of lips and breath. Round the mouth dim silence hushing, waits to die ecstatic death. Span across in troubled curving, bow of promise upper lip. Set them free with gracious swerving, let the wing-words float and dip. Dumb art thou, O love immortal, more than words thy speech must be. Childless yet the tender portal of the home of melody. Now the nostrils open fearless, proud and calm unconsciousness. Sure it must be something peerless the great Pan would express. Deepens crowd some meaning tender, in the pure dear lady face. Low blinding burst of splendor, 'tis the free soul's issuing grace. Two calm lakes of molten glory, circling around unfathomed depths. Lightning flashes transitory, cross the gulfs where darkness sleeps. To this the gate, at last of gladness, to the outward striving me, and a rain of light and sadness out its loves and longings flee. With the presence I am smitten, dumb with a foreknown surprise, presence greater yet than written, even in the glorious eyes. The gulf with inward grazes, I may look that I am lost, wandering deep in spirit mazes in a sea without a coast. Windows open to the glorious, time and space, oh far beyond. Woman, now thou art victorious, and I perish over fond. Spring's lofty yet unspoken, in the forehead's endless grace, full of silences unbroken, infinite, unfeatured face. Domes above the mount of wonder, height and hollow, wrapped up in night, hiding in the caverns under, wominations in their might, passing forms the highest human faints way to the divine. Features none of man or woman can unveil the holiest shine. Sideways, grooved porches only visible to passing eye, stand the silent, doorless, lonely entrance gates of melody, but all sounds fly in as boldly, groan and sing song and kiss and cry, at their galaxies lifted coolly darkly betwixt the earth and sky. Beauty that thou art spent, thou knowest so in faint heart glad despair, for from the mountain thou overflowest in a fall of torrent air, hiding what thou hast created in a half-transparent shroud. Thus with glory soft abated, shines the moon through vapory cloud. Okay, that was in 15, and now to chapter 16. Even the sticks which ninefold her enfoldeth, hems not Ceres' daughter in its flow, but she grasps the apple, ever holdeth. Here sad Orcus down below. Schiller, das Ideal und das Leben. Ever as I sang, the veil was uplifted. Ever as I sang, the signs of life grew till, when the eyes dawned upon me, it was that sun as the splendor which my feeble song attempted to re-embody. The wonder is that I would not altogether overcome, but was able to complete my song to the unseen veil continued to rise. This ability came solely from the state of mental elevation on which I found myself. Only because uplifted song was I able to endure the blaze of the dawn. But I cannot tell whether she looked more of statue or more of woman. She seemed removed into that region of fantasy, where all is intensely vivid, but nothing clearly fixed, but nothing clearly defined. At last, as I sang of her descending hair, the glow of soul faded away, like a dying sunset. A lamp within had been extinguished, and the house of life shone blank in the winter morn. She was a statue once more, but visible, and that was much gained. Yet the revulsion from hope and fruition was such that, unable to restrain myself, I sprang to her, and in defiance of the law of the place, flung my arms around her as if I could tear from her the grip of visible death, and lifted her from the pedestal down to my heart. But no sooner had her feet ceased to be in contact with the black pedestal that she shuddered and trembled all over, writhing, writhing from my arms. Before I could tighten their hold, she sprang into the corridor. Proshvakal, you should not have touched me. Darted behind when the exterior pillars of the circle and disappeared. I followed almost as fast, but ere I could reach the pillar, the sound of a closing door, the saddest of all sounds, fell on my ear, and arriving at the spot where she had vanished, I saw, lighted by a pale yellow lamp, which hung above, a heavy, rough door, altogether unlike any others I had seen in the palace, for they were all ebony or ivory and iron, and covered with silver plates, or some odorous wood, and very ornate, whereas this seemed of old oak with heavy nails and iron studs. Notwithstanding the precipitation of my pursuit, I could not help reading in silver letters beneath the lamp, "No one enters here without the leave of the queen." But what was the queen to me? When I followed my white lady, I dashed at the door to the wall and sprang through. Lo, I stood on a waste, windy hill. Great stones like tombstones stood all about me. No door, no palace was to be seen. A white figure leaned past me, wringing her hands and crying, "You should have not have sung to me. You should have sung to me. You should have sung to me," and disappeared behind one of the stones. I followed her. A cold gust of wind met me from behind the stone. When I looked, I saw nothing but a great hole in the earth, and to which I could find no way of entering. Had she fallen in? I could not tell. I must wait for the daylight. I sat down and wept, for there was no help. See, that is 16. Oh, and hi, Jess Wes. Okay, we gotta do an ad break. And then we will continue with chapter 17? Yes. Okay. So, be right back. I'll have words on stream if you happen to have a sub or Twitch Turbo. Okay. We're back. Switching back. Okay. Chapter 17. First I thought, almost despairing, this must crush my spirit. This must crush my spirit now. Yet I bore it and am bearing, only do not ask me how. Heine. When the daylight came, it brought the possibility of action, but with it little of consolation. The first visible increase of light, I gazed into the chasm, but could not for more than an hour see sufficiently well to discover its nature. At last I saw it was most a perpendicular opening, like a roughly excavated well, only very large. I could perceive no bottom, and it was not till the sun actually rose that I discovered a sort of natural staircase, in many parts little more than suggested, which led round and round the gulf, descending spirally into its abyss. I saw at once that this was my path. Without a moment's hesitation, glad to quit the sunlight, which stared at me most heartlessly, I commenced my tortuous descent. It was very difficult. In some parts I had to cling to the rocks like a bat. In one place I had dropped from the track down upon the next returning of the stair, which being broad in this particular portion and standing out from the wall at right angles, received me upon my feet safe, though somewhat stupefied by the shock. After descending a great way, I found the stair ended at a narrow opening, which entered the rock horizontally. Into this I crept, and having entered, had just room to turn round. I saw my head out into the shaft at which I had come down, and surveyed the course of my descent. I looked up. Looking up, I saw that the stars, though the sun must by this time have been behind the heavens. Looked down below, I saw that the staff went sheer down, smooth as glass, and far behind me I saw the reflection of the same stars I had seen in the heavens when I looked up. I turned again, and crept inward some distance, when the passage widened and I was at length able to stand and walk upright. Wider and loftier they grew, new paths branched off on every side, great opening halls appeared, till at last I found myself wandering on through an underground country, in which the sky was of rock, and instead of trees and flowers, there was only fantastic rocks and stones. And ever as I went, darker grew my thoughts, till at last I had no hope whatsoever of finding the White Lady. I no longer called her to myself my White Lady, whenever a choice was necessary. I always chose the path which seemed to lead downwards. At length, I began to find those regions were inhabited. Far behind a rock, a peal of harsh grating laughter, full of evil humor, ranging through my ears, and looking round, I saw a queer goblin creature, with a great head and ridiculous features, just such as described in German histories and travels as kobolds. Yay! What do you want with me? I said. He pointed at me with a long forefinger, very thick very thick at the root, and sharpened to a point, answered, "Hee hee. What do you want here?" Then, changing his tone, he continued with mock humility, "Honored sir, vouchsafe to withdraw from thy slaves the luster of thy august presence, for thy slaves cannot support its brightness." A second appeared and struck, "You are so big, you keep the sun from us. We can't see for you, and we're so cold." Thereupon rose on all sides the most terrific uproar of laughter, from voices like those of children in volume, but scanned, and harsh as those of decrepit age. though unfortunately without its weakness. The whole pandemonium of fairy devils of all varieties of fantastic ugliness, both in form and feature, and of all sizes from 1 to 4 feet, seemed to have suddenly assembled about me. At length, after a great babble of talk among themselves in a language unknown to me, and after seemingly endless gesticulation, consultation, elbow nudging, and unmitigated peals of laughter, they formed into a circle of about one of their number, who scrambled up upon a stone, and much to my surprise and somewhat to my dismay began to sing in a voice corresponding to its nature to his talking one, from beginning to end, the song with which I had brought the light into the eyes of the White Lady. He sang the same air, too, and all the time maintained a face of mock entreaty and worship, accompanying with the song with the travested gestures of the one playing on the lute. The whole assembly kept silence except at the close of every verse, when they roared and danced and shouted with laughter, and flung themselves to the ground in real or pretended convulsions of delight. When he had finished, the singer threw himself on the top of the stone, turned heels over head several times in his descent, and when he did alight, it was on the top of his head, on which he hopped about, making the most grotesque gesticulations with his legs in the air. Inexpressible laughter followed, which broke up in a power of tiny stones from innumerable hands. They could not materially injure me, although they cut me on the head and face. I attempted to run away, but they all rushed upon me, and laying hold of every part that I could photograph held me tight. Crowding around me like bees, they shouted an insect swarm of exasperating speeches up to my face, among which the most frequently were, "You shan't have her, you shan't have her, he he he. She's for a better man, how he'll kiss her, how he'll kiss her." Galvanic torrent of this battery of malevolence stung to life with me a spark of nobleness, and I said aloud, "Well, if he's a better man, let him have her." They instantly let go their hold of me, and fell back a step or two with a whole broadside of grunts and humps. As of unexpected and disappointed approbation, I made a step or two forward, and a lane was instantly opened for me through the midst of the grinning little antics, who bowed most politely to me on every side as I passed. After I had gone a few yards, I looked back and saw them all standing quite still, looking after me like a great school of boys, till suddenly one turned round, and with a loud whoop rushed into the midst of the others. In an instant, the whole was one writhing and tumbling heap of contortions, reminding me of the live pyramids of intertwined snakes of which travelers make report. As soon as one was worked out of the mass, he bounded off a few paces, and then, with a somersault and a run, threw himself gyrating into the air, and descended with all his weight on the summit of the heaving and struggling chaos of fantastic figures. I left them still busy, and this fierce and apparently aimless amusement, and as I went I sang, "If a nobler waits for thee, I will weep aside. It is well that thou shouldst be of the nobler bride, for if love builds up the home, where the heart is free, homeless yet the heart must roam, that has not found thee. One must suffer, I for her. Yield in her my part, take her, thou art worthier. Still I be still my heart, gift ungotten, large high of frustrate will, but to yield it lovingly is a something still." Then a little song arose of itself in my soul, and I felt for the moment, while it sank sadly within me, as if I was once more walking up and down the white hall of fantasy in the fairy palace. But this has lasted no longer than the song, as it will be seen. Do not vex thy violet, perfume to afford, else no order thou wilt get from this little hoard. In thy lady's gracious eyes look not thou too long, else from them the glory flies, and thou dost her wrong. Come not thou too near the maid, clasp her not too wild, else the splendor is allayed, and thy heart beguiled." A crash of laughter more discordant and deriding than any ever I heard yet invaded my ears. I looked on the direction of the sound. I saw a little elderly woman, much taller, however, than the goblins I had just left, seated upon a stone by the side of the path. She rose as I drew near and came forward to meet me. She was very plain and commonplace in appearance, without being without being hideously ugly, looking at my face with a stupid sneer. Yet, isn't it a pity you haven't a pretty girl to walk alone with through this sweet country? How different everything would look. Wouldn't it strange that no one can... Strange that no one can... Oh my gosh. Strange that one can never have what one would like best. How the roses would bloom and all that, even in this infernal hole. Wouldn't they, Honoros? Her eyes would light up the cave, wouldn't they? That depends on the pretty girl, on who the pretty girl should be, replied I. Not so very much that, she answered. Look here. I had turned to go away as I gave my reply, but now I stopped and looked at her. As a rough, unsightly bud might suddenly blossom into the most lovely flower, or rather a sunbeam burst through the shapeless cloud and transfigure the earth, so burst a face of resplendent beauty, as it were through the unsightly visage of the woman, destroying its light as it dawned through. A summer sky rose above me, gray with heat. Across a shining, slumberous landscape looked from afar the peaks of snow-capped mountains, and down from a great rock beside me fell a sheet of water mad with its own delight. Stay with me, she said, lifting up her exquisite face and looking full in mine. I drew back, and again the fertile laugh grated upon my ears. Again the rocks closed in around me, and the ugly woman looked back at me with wicked mocking hazel eyes. You shall have your reward, she said. You shall see your white lady again. That lies not with you, I replied, and turned and left her. She followed me with shriek upon shriek of laughter as I went on my way. I may mention that, although there was always light enough to see my path, and a few yards on every side of me, I could never find out the source of this sad sepulchral illumination. That is the end of chapter 20. No, wait, not 20. Not at 20 yet. 17, yes. Take a pill, and then we'll start up with the next one. I tried to twice swallow a pill. It didn't work out that well. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. It's a small one is the problem. Yeah. Okay. All right. Chapter 18. And the winds uproar, the seas raging grim, at the sights that are born in him. Heine. From the dreams of bliss shall men awake, one day, but not to weep. The dreams remain, they only break the mirror of the sleep. Jean-Paul, Hesperus. How I got through this dreary part of my travels, I do not know. I do not think I was upheld by the hope that any moment the light might break upon me, for I scarcely thought about that. I went on with a dull endurance, varied by moments of uncontrollable sadness, for more and more the conviction grew upon me that I should never, ever see the White Lady again. It may seem strange with one with whom I held so little communion, should have so engrossed my thoughts, but benefits conferred awaken love in some minds as surely as benefits received in others. Besides, being delighted and proud that my songs had called the beautiful creature to life, the same fact caused me to feel a tenderness unspeakable for her, accompanied with a kind of feeling of property in her. For so the goblin's selfishness would reward the angel love. When to all this is added an overpowering sense of her beauty and unquestioning conviction that this was a true index to inward loveliness, it may be understood how it came to pass that my imagination filled my whole soul with the play of its own multitudinous colors and harmonies around the form which stood, a gracious marble radiance in the midst of its white tall of fantasy. The time passed by unheeded, for my thoughts were very busy. Perhaps this was also in the cause of my needing no food and never thinking how I should find any during this subterraneous part of my travels. How long they endured I could not tell, for I had no means of measuring time, and when I looked back there was such a discrepancy between the decisions of my imagination and my judgment as to the length of time that had passed that I was bewildered, and gave up all attempts to arrive at any conclusion on the point. A gray mist continually gathered behind me. When I looked back toward the past, this mist was the medium through which my eyes had to strain for a vision of what had gone by. The form of the white lady had receded into an unknown region. At length, the country of a rock began to close around me, gradually and slowly narrowing, till I found myself walking in a gallery of rock once more, both sides of which I could touch with my outstretched hands. It narrowed yet, until I was forced to move carefully in order to avoid striking against the projecting pieces of rock. The roof sank lower and lower until I was compelled first to stoop, and then to creep on my hands and knees. It recalled terrible dreams of childhood, but I was not much afraid because I felt sure that this was my path, and my only hope of leaving fairyland, of which I was now almost weary. At length, on getting past an abrupt turn in the passage, through which I had forced myself, I saw a few yards ahead of me the long-forgotten daylight shining through a small opening, to which the path, if path it could now be called, led me. With great difficulty, I accomplished these last few yards, and came forth to the day. I stood on the shore of a wintry sea, with a wintry sun just a few feet above its horizon edge. It was bare and waste and gray. Hundreds of hopeless waves rushed constantly shorewards, falling exhausted upon a beach of great loose stones that seemed to stretch miles and miles in both directions. There was nothing for the eye but mingling shades of gray, nothing for the ear but the rush of the coming, the roar of the breaking, the moan of retreating wave. No rock lifted up a sheltering severity upon the dreariness around. Even from that which I had myself emerged rose scarcely a foot above the opening which I had reached the dismal day, more dismal than even the tomb which I had left. A cold, death-like wind swept across the shore, seeming to issue from a pale mouth of cloud upon the horizon. Okay, I made up a new word for a second there. Horizon. Yes, the horizon. Okay, sorry. Shall reach the dismal day, more dismal than on the tomb I had left. Cold, death-like wind swept across the shore, seeming to issue from a pale mouth of cloud upon the horizon. Sign of life was nowhere visible. I wandered over the stones, up and down the beach, a human embodiment of the nature around me. The wind increased as its wave flowed through my soul. The foam rushed higher and higher up. The stones, a few dead stars, began to gleam in the east, and the sound of waves grew louder and yet more despairing. A dark curtain of cloud was lifted up, and a pale blue rent shone between its foot and the edge of the sea, out from which rushed an icy storm of frozen wind that tore the waters into spray as it passed, and flung the billows in raving heaps upon the desolate shore. I could bear it no longer. I will not be tortured to death, I tried. I will meet it halfway. The life within me is yet enough to bear me up to the face of death, and then I die unconquered. Before it had grown so dark, I had observed, though without any particular interest, that in one part of the shore a low platform of rock seemed to run out far into the midst of the breaking waters. Towards this I now went, scrambling over smooth stones, to which scarce even a particle of seaweed clung, and having found it, I got on it, and scrambled its directions, and followed its directions, as near as I could guess, out into the tumbling chaos. I could hardly keep my feet against the wind and sea. The waves repeatedly all but swept me off my path, but I kept on my way until I reached the end of the low promontory, which in all of the waves rose a good many feet above the surface, and in their rise was covered with their waters. I stood one moment and gazed into a heaving abyss beneath, then plunged headlong into the mounting wave below. A blessing like the kiss of a mother seemed to alight on my soul. A calm deeper than that which accompanies a hope deferred bathed my spirit. I sank far into the waters and sought not to return. I felt as if once more the great arms of the beech tree were around me, soothing me after the miseries I had passed through, and telling me like a little sick child that I should be better tomorrow. The waters of themselves lifted me as with loving arms to the surface. I breathed again, but did not unclose my eyes. I would not look on the wintry sea and the pitiless gray sky. Thus I floated till something gently touched me. It was a little boat floating beside me. How it came there I could not tell, but it rose and sank on the waters, and kept touching me in its fall, as if with a human will let me know that help was by me. It was a little gay-colored boat, seeming covered with glistering scales like those of a fish, all of brilliant rainbow hues. I scrambled into it, and lay down in the bottom with a sense of exquisite repose. And then I drew over me a rich, heavy purple cloth that was beside me, and lying still, knew by the sound of the waters that my little bark was fleeting rapidly onwards, finding, however, that none of that stormy motion which the sea had manifested when I beheld it from the shore. I opened my eyes and looked first up, saw above me the deep violet sky of a warm southern night, and then, lifting my head, saw that I was sailing fast upon a summer sea, and the last border of a southern twilight. The aureole of the sun yet shot the extreme faint tips of its long rays above the horizon waves, and withdrew them now. It was a perpetual twilight, the stars great and earnest like children's eyes, bent down lovingly towards the waters. And the reflected stars within seemed to float up, as if longing to meet their embraces. When I looked down, I do wonder what met my view, for vaguely revealed beneath the wave I floated above my whole past. The fields of my childhood flitted by, the halls of my youthful labors, the streets of great cities where I had dwelt, and the assemblies of men and women wherein I had wearied myself seeking for rest. But so indistinct were the visions that sometimes I thought I was sailing on a shallow sea, and that strange rocks and forests of sea plants beguiled my eyes sufficiently to be transformed by the magic of the fantasy into well-known objects and regions. Yet at times a beloved form seemed to lie close beneath me in sleep, and the eyelids would tremble as if about to forsake the conscious eye, and the arms would heave upwards as if in dreams they sought for a satisfying presence. But these motions might come only from the heaving of the waters between those forms and me. Soon I fell asleep, overcome with fatigue and delight, and dreams of unspeakable joy, of restored friendships, of revived embraces of love which said had never died, of faces that had vanished long ago, yet said with smiling lips that they knew nothing of the grave, of pardons implored and granted with such bursting floods of love that I was almost glad I had sinned. Thus I passed through this wondrous twilight. I awoke with the feeling that I had been kissed and loved to my heart's content, and found that my boat was floating motionless by the grassy shore of a little island. Let's see. So I think we're gonna call it here. Because next time we'll be starting up at chapter 19. So, and there's 25 chapters. So with how we've been going, we'll be able to finish this up next week. Which I think that means that it'll just taken us 5 streams to do this. So it's a shorter book. Yo. But anyway, I did hope you enjoyed it, and see y'all next time for the reading, for finishing up the reading.